You're listening to the Plane Talking UK podcast, the UK-based podcast written by a passenger for anyone. And here are your hosts, Carlos Stebbings, Matt Smith and Neville Bounds.
Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Plane Talking UK podcast. I'm not Carl Stebbings, I'm Matt Smith. He's not here this week, which is slightly scary, I'm not going to lie. But joining me is the legend that is. I'm not going to come up with any silly puns because I leave that to Carlos, frankly. But it's always a pleasure to have my mate, the legend that is Neville Bounds. Hello, Neville, how are you?
Oh, thanks, Matt. Yeah, great to see you again. And looking forward to a great show. It's been quite a week this week, very busy, lots of stuff going on. And you might notice behind me, I've just changed my backdrop slightly, which is normally a lovely British Airways A380. But I'm going to talk more about that later in the show.
I'm not going to lie, I'm a little scared about this. I have been threatened. I have been warned there might be a rant in its infancy about to appear. So this could be very, very terrifying. So unfortunately, we don't have Carlos. We also don't have the legend that is Armando. He has given his apologies. He's off doing some kind of, is it Reno air racing or something?
The Reno air race, yeah.
Apparently that's more interesting than doing this rubbish. He's probably right, to be fair. So as we are two men down, we thought what we were going to have to do, and two of them being quite, important members of the family, shall we say, we've had to draft in some extra special subs. So joining us this week, He's had a busy time of it lately, although not so much now because he's officially retired. It gives me great pleasure to welcome the legend that is Sir Captain of Nick.
Oh, hi, guys. What a pleasure it is to be on your show again. Although I happen to know exactly where Armando and Carlos are. Have you not seen the UK Plane Talking podcast?
Sorry, what now?
The UK Plane Talking podcast, they're putting out a show right now.
Are they?
Sorry, I think you might find that they've disappeared off to make their own.
Right. Okay. Well, that's obviously very troubling news for us all. Great. Hopefully we can win those people back who have gone over to the dark side. Then, if
you might have to check their contracts.
Yes, indeed. I shall look into that forthwith and without haste. But to hopefully win a few of the listeners back, we do have. I don't really know how to describe it. He is the head of probably one of the biggest and best, in my opinion, aviation podcasts in the entire world. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Captain Jeff.
Hello there. Where's Carlos and Armando? They told me I was going to be their first guests on their guest.
Goodness sake. Have you two been colluding? Seriously?
So
no.
I must have dialed in the wrong show. I'm sorry.
Right. Well, I'm very grateful. No, you stay right where you are. don't you go anywhere. No.
Hello, great to be here.
Fantastic. So yes. So as I say, we've rolled in a couple of super subs to fill in the void, if you like, of two big members of the family being away. You can tell I'm not used to introducing the show, can't you? It's quite funny. Yeah, Nev, you're in charge next time. This is all a bit weird.
Okay.
Yes. So a little bit of housekeeping before we get into proceedings. It is just gone 7:05 on Friday, the 7th of June, 2019. We're going to say thank you to a few people who have been helping us keep the show on the air.
We are. And yes, these are the people that have contributed to the Patreon this month. And we are very grateful for your support. They are Adam Spink, Andrew Wilson, Captain Jeff, Eric Graves, Evan Shue, Graham Haley, Jacob Darlington Brown, Jeff Ward, Jonathan Warner, Jordan Rose, Liz Piper, Masha, Matt Caton, Matt Donemeyer, Myla, Owen, Neil Lanwarn, Nicholas Hewitt, Nico Rager, Philip Labe, Ray Williams, Ruben Wells, Ryan Harper, Stuart Backer, Stephanie Plummer, Steve Andress, Stuart Black. And the people that have paid by the regular PayPal method are Richard Adams, Jenny Parkinson, and Tony S. And we are very grateful for all of your contributions. We could not do the show without you.
Absolutely not. And if you would like to become a Patreon, or if you would like to make a donation, take yourselves to our website, www.plaintalkinguk.com. On that front page there, you will find all the ways that you can either interact with the show or make a donation. You can even, if money, like me, money's a bit tight, you can even, if you want to, do your shopping using, if you're an Amazon customer, there's a link on our website, and if you do your shopping through that link, we get a little advertising referral fee, so you can contribute towards the show without even having to put your hand in your pocket, unless you're buying something for yourself, obviously. So that is I'm really bad at this, aren't I? I'm so sorry, ladies and gentlemen. Normal service will be resumed next week, I promise.
Don't worry about it, mate. You're brilliant. Although now that I'm no longer employed anymore, I'm afraid you're going to have to take me off that list. Sorry.
Indeed. Actually, also worth mentioning. Also worth mentioning, by the way, that we did have a donation very recently from the legend that is Philip Davis. By the way, sorry, that was missed in the email that went across to Nev, so that's my fault. Apologies for that. Thank you, Philip Davis, for your very kind, generous donation as well. So, I think before I get into yet more trouble, I think what we should do is get on with the show. How do we feel about that, chaps?
Yes, sounds like a good idea to me.
Indeed. Okay, so if everyone's ready, then let's go. Sorry. Humble apologies to our vision mixer today. If I'd have actually given him a bit more notice that we were going to do that, it might have been a bit slicker. Sorry, mate. Anyway, the first story this week is on simpleflying.com, and obviously, as I'm reading the story, of course, it is a Ryanair story, and this headline is: Ryanair now publishes their monthly CO2 statistics. Ryanair is set to Ryanair is to set a European Union first by becoming the first airline to release monthly CO2 statistics. The airline hopes to challenge the industry while leading by example. If all airlines begin to publish monthly CO2 statistics, it could have an effect on the industry's carbon footprint. Airlines could feel ashamed for having higher carbon dioxide emissions, which could encourage them to cut underperforming routes in order to boost their score. Ryanair claims that they have the lowest CO2 emissions per passenger per kilometre of any EU airline. Ryanair currently delivers an average of CO2 emission of 66 grams per passenger per kilometre. This is calculated by dividing the carrier's total carbon dioxide output by the total distance flown by the airline and the number of passengers carried. In fact, while 66 grams per passenger seems impressive, it's not good enough for Ryanair. The low-cost Irish carrier claims to cut this aims to cut this to just 60 grams per person per kilometre. They will achieve this with their new Boeing 737 MAX aircraft, of which they are expecting 210 by 2024. A game of load factors. Part of the reason that Ryanair's carbon emissions per passenger per kilometre are so low is due to the carrier's impressive load factors. Load factor is essentially the number of seats filled per plane. For Ryanair, this is an impressive 96%. This means that 96% of the seats flown by the airline were occupied. Full-service airlines tend to have lower load factors than low-cost carriers. In fact, the Lufthansa Group's load factor for January stands at just 76.4%. This is far below what Ryanair reported for the same month at 91%. I mean, I could go on, but you get the gist here, basically. So, I mean, those are impressive numbers. I mean, we've mentioned the load factors before. I mean, they are impressive numbers that Ryanair do. I know they're not everybody's favourite airline, but it's pretty impressive stuff. What do you reckon?
Their 737 MAX numbers are particularly low right now.
Yes, I suspect that may be the case. Have we got any idea when they think these are going to be in the air, the MAXes, yet?
Well, they've said officially sometime in August. However, they're thinking, or I heard a quote from somebody, I think the CEO of Emirates, that said that he'd be surprised if it were before the end of the year.
Really? Gosh. Okay.
Yes.
Oh, that'll give them
didn't
time
they-
to fix all those flap tracks, won't it? Or was that? They were the other marks. I don't know, actually.
Oh dear, I don't know what you mean. Nev, anything?
I'm not allowed to say this sort of thing on airline
Oh
pilot.
right, okay. So you're saving it all for us. Nev, have you got anything to add to that?
Well, they were saying as well in the press, I think it was last week, that they'd quite like to have a look at some of the 737-800 NG series whilst they're at it as well. So I think there might be some other factory recalls, as they call them in the automotive world, that's going on there. So, yeah, obviously they cannot afford to get this wrong, can they? So if it takes a little bit longer, then it takes a bit longer. But of course,
I guess so.
in doing that, the cost associated with it is huge, as you can imagine.
I mean, I presume that perhaps I'm being a bit naive here. We all know that I don't know a lot about this. I'm assuming that the people who are waiting for their various MAX aircraft are being... are they being compensated for this inconvenience? I mean, I don't really understand how it works.
Well, I'm sure there's a discussion going on with Boeing because obviously they will have sold seats on these as well, and a lot of operators brought them in for the summer seasons specifically. Obviously, the amount of flights operated between the start of July and September, generally speaking, a lot higher. So people have airlines have brought them in specifically for that season. So it's ongoing, I think.
Right.
And every week there's a new bit of a nugget of news that comes out, but nothing concrete yet.
Well, there we are on that bombshell. I think we should perhaps move on to the next story. I assume that's with you, is it, Ev?
It is. It's my favourite aviation website. It's The Sun.
Oh, dear.
And it's a BA story, of course. And it says, sickening. British Airways passenger disgusted to find business class seat covered in vomit during flight. And it's just given a blanket to cover it up.
Oh.
It says that a British Airways passenger was left horrified to find his seat covered in what appeared to be vomit during a flight whilst travelling from London Heathrow. Passenger Dave Gildea had upgraded to business class for the flight to Seattle when he made the discovery during the flight. Could I just point out, I would have thought he would have discovered that before the flight.
Yes.
Not during the flight, but we'll go with it as it is. The 38-year-old, unnecessary age reference, told Sun Online Travel, I had upgraded to business class at the airport in London Heathrow and was assigned seats 64K. I thought it was seat singular, but there you go. I didn't notice anything until about 2 hours into the British Airways flight when I popped down excuse me, at the footstool so I could get some sleep and saw the vomit on the seat.
Yum.
It was also splashed on the wall behind and the floor below. Hope everyone's had their dinner, which I then noticed. However, he then said that he told the cabin crew about it, and they asked him if he'd been sick on the seat himself. Dave, who works as a VP at a Silicon Valley software company, continued, I went to the cabin crew, and the attendant's first response was this here when you boarded? But it was clear it was dried in. He didn't offer a seat change or an apology. So I asked for a blanket to cover it up so I could put my feet down. Of course, as I slept, I moved around on the blanket, and so I woke up with dried vomit on my feet. It was pretty disgusting. With the price I paid for the ticket, I was shocked. Well, so what price would you have liked to pay?
Right. I mean, to be honest, if it was a seat with vomit on it, I'd like it to be free, personally. But
it's a fair point.
I'd risk it
that,
if it was free.
Yeah, but he's a BA Silver member. He was surprised about the lack of response, having heard nothing about the incident in 2 weeks, apart from being told that they were looking into it.
Right.
Whilst he admitted that BA is often very good service and the rest of the flight was fine, he said how poor the incident was being handled. Dave said, I tend to travel a lot. This was a very poor experience, and the handling of the experience at the time and since then has been where the problem is. It's frustrating how they take your money in a second for a ticket, which is how it works as far as I'm aware. But when it's a problem, it takes weeks. But isn't that just like, a tax demand? That's how it
not
works.
not
They
something
take the
that
money
you ever
first,
want. Yeah.
and it'll take several months to get it
Yeah.
refunded.
So I mean, there is a picture which I'm just which Owen has just very quickly put up there, and he's going to make it go away again because that's just disgusting. So there we are. There are some pictures that are associated with this story, but we're just a very quick showing of the picture because concerned that some people might be eating their tea if they're watching the show.
Just whilst we're talking about BA, and this is not in the script because it's a bit of
brace
breaking
yourselves,
news
everyone. Oh no!
Tonight, BA, I think you need to have a word with yourselves. You have sold lots of very nice priced flights on the 747 for some local flying from Heathrow to Manchester, Newcastle and Glasgow. So very short routes, so between 45 minutes and an hour flying time. Brilliant. And that gives people a chance to fly on the jumbo that wouldn't normally be able to do so or to afford to do so on transatlantic or Asia Pacific routes. So that's a very nice gesture and a very nice thing to do. And in fact, one of our listeners, Ron, has booked himself and his son on a 747, which is brilliant. Today, they have sent emails to presumably most passengers to say, oh, we're just going to substitute the aircraft for something else, like an A319 or an A320. And talk about a PR fail. I mean, it doesn't even begin to come close, does it really? So in protest of this, normally you'd see behind me an A380 of British Airways, which I'm very proud to display, but I've had to cover it up with my pillowcase because I feel so strongly about it. And it's not a big deal for a lot of people, I understand, but honestly, talk about how to get it wrong. I mean, BA, you have done it this time, and I just do not understand whether it's some environmentalist lark going on. I don't know, but I just think if you're going to offer those tickets almost at any price, it doesn't really matter what the price is, and you've got clients booked on the flights, especially the fact it was a 747 on the short haul sectors, which is extremely unusual. Then you really ought to honour that. And I think to send emails to your customers to say that you've substituted the flights for the usual short haul fleet is ridiculous. And of course, the trouble is people will have booked those flights, so they'll get full refunds. But what they won't get refunds for is the hotels that they might have stayed at either end of the sector, for example, and transport to and from, which they may have already booked or whatever it is. So I just think...
I mean, also, Nev, presumably people have chosen this because, as you say, I mean, the 747 is an iconic aircraft. There's no two ways about it. It's an aircraft that people have an awful lot of love for. And, they are beginning to reach the end. Certainly the passenger variants are beginning to reach the end of their, serviceable life, for want of a better word. So it won't be long before they aren't carrying passengers anymore. I know they're very popular, certainly for haulage. But I mean, presumably...
Well, I think the thing is that the reason they did it was because it was to celebrate their centenary year. So, fantastic stuff. And they've gone to all the effort of painting 4 aircraft, isn't it, in retro colours. So that's fantastic. Some 747s and an A319. Brilliant. And everybody loves that. And then they offer these short haul sectors on the jumbos. Brilliant, great idea, and then they go and pull the offer. And I think that's just a bit poor, guys.
Well, presumably, as you say, because people have chosen those particular routes because of the aircraft that was going to be doing it.
Completely. That's the only reason they chose it.
Yeah.
And the specific flight numbers too.
Well, I mean, that's really disappointing. I think. Jeff, do you have any sort of opinion on this?
Well, I agree with you. They fell short, and that's the whole reason why people wanted to fly on these special flights was because of the airplane. It's pretty sad.
Is that how they advertised the flights, Nev? Was it down as a 747 experience flight, or was it just?
Very much. No, very much so. They said they're going to run these on the short haul sectors from Heathrow to Manchester, Glasgow and Newcastle, those 3 regional flights, and they were going to be on a 747. And the ticket prices were, sensible or comparable with the normal short haul fleet. So a lot of people booked them. And just late this afternoon, there was rumours coming out, they're going to pull the flights, and they have, and they've been writing to presumably all of the people that have been booked on those sectors on that specific aircraft, saying, "Oh, we're going to swap it to, well, presumably a 319 or 320." So, which is not really the point, because you can do that any day of the week, can't you? Really, but to have a short haul sector on a 747 as an experience, because you might not be able to afford to fly, long haul. Absolutely brilliant, and a great PR win for BA, and then they go and do this. So I just find it extraordinary, really.
Yeah, it's a mess, isn't it? There's no two ways about it. It's definitely a mess.
Anyway, end of rant.
Okay, right. Okay.
For the moment, anyway.
Right, okay. I haven't got access to my show notes for reasons I won't go into, Nev, so who's next?
Oh, that's interesting. I'm glad you asked me that question, because it's yes. Next, it's Captain Jeff, who's going to talk to us about. It's an article on the CNN website.
Oh, I'm sorry. Are we still recording? You'll understand the little joke here in a second. Why allowing pilots to sleep in the cockpit might improve airline safety. And as Nev mentioned from CNN, airline pilots are often exhausted. An extreme example happened in 2008 when a pilot and a co-pilot both fell asleep at the controls, missing their landing in Hawaii, earning pilot's license suspensions as well as getting fired. More recently, overtired pilots came very close to landing on top of another airplane at San Francisco International Airport in 2017. With endless beaches and that's an ad I'm reading. Okay, it's not uncommon.
Wow.
What I had to do is I had to make this into a more readable version, because it was just making my computer CPU go nuts with all the CRAP they put in these darn websites.
Carlos chooses them specially for that purpose.
I must. Yeah. Like I had to take my fire extinguisher and spray it on my computer.
It's an unusual method of cooling, sir.
Yeah, probably won't last as long now.
No.
Let's see. It's not uncommon for a pilot for a major commercial airline to, for instance, start work in Florida at 5 p.m. with her first flight departing an hour later for a 5-hour trip across the country, arriving in California just about 8 p.m. local time. Then she might get a short break and fly a 90-minute short hop flight to another California city. When she lands from this second flight, she has spent 6.5 hours of the last 9 in the cockpit. She is also 3 time zones from where she started work, and her body thinks it's 2 a.m. There is no doubt she's tired, and she's lucky not to have encountered any schedule adjustments for aircraft maintenance or weather delays. The airline industry and the government agency that regulates it, the Federal Aviation Administration, at least here, have taken steps to reduce pilot fatigue, but many pilots and others remain worried that 2 pilots are required to remain awake and alert for the entire flight, though one or both may be dealing with symptoms of fatigue. One possible suggestion is letting pilots take brief naps in the cockpit. As researchers of consumer opinions about the airline industry, we've found that the American public is wary of this idea, but may feel better about it once they've heard an explanation of how it actually makes their flights safer. Shall I continue? Okay.
If you like, I mean, if we've reached the, let's leave the story there for the moment. What do you think about this, Jeff? What is your gut feeling?
Well, I have anecdotal experience with sleeping in the cockpit, not for my present airline that I've been flying for the last 30 years, because we are not allowed to sleep in the cockpit. But when I was in the Air Force flying long-haul flights on the C-141B, what would you call it? A long-range air transport aircraft, 4-engine air transport craft, and we had pilot, co-pilot, and flight engineer positions, and we didn't get up out of our seat, for like rest breaks, like a lot of the long-haul airlines do now. And so we were required to stay in our seats the entire flight, and these could be long flights, 8-10 hour long flights or more. And so it was actually allowed in the Military Airlift Command when I was in the Air Force in the 80s, and it worked out just fine. So what would happen normally is, when you're in the latter stage of your climb, or maybe just arriving at cruise altitude, the aircraft commander or captain would kind of ask would ask the co-pilot whether he felt okay or she felt okay, or should he take the first nap, and that's how it worked. And usually I'd say, I feel pretty good. And so usually the aircraft commander would just kind of recline his seat and kick up his feet, hopefully not hitting anything in the process.
Yeah.
And and take a half hour and a half nap or whatever. And so I have no problem with it, actually.
And now, obviously, Nick, you were doing sort of long haul for many number of years. What was your what did you tend to do? Were you resting in the cockpit, or was there a rest area that you were able to go to? I mean, how did it work with your airline?
Well, if you had multiple crews on board, so, if you're doing a really long sector, so you've got one or even two extra pilots, then you were able to move out of the cockpit and into the crew rest facility, which is normally a nice bunk area, and you could take a specific, rest period there. So that's why you carried extra pilots specifically for that. But of course, a lot of our sectors have only two pilots. You can still fly up to sort of 9 hours or more with two pilots, and that's pretty tiring. And particularly if it's a long drag through the night when you're at a WOCL, a window of circadian low. So basically when your body says you should be asleep, but you're trying to work, then and only two pilots, there's obviously no one to step into the seat if you need to nap. And they've discovered in the UK, they had years of studying, and they even connected pilots up to special monitors. They discovered that guys got so tired that while they were on the approach, they were taking micro sleeps, so they're taking seconds worth of unconsciousness because their bodies were so tired. They were going into these micro sleeps, and obviously even when you're on an approach and your adrenaline is usually pretty high and you're concentrated very hard, it was impossible to prevent yourself from taking these mini naps. So they said, well, there's got to be a better way of doing this. So quite a few years ago, they formally introduced we called it crew rest recovery, but it was a procedure that you had to follow if you felt very tired or anticipating feeling tired, where you would literally zone off the cockpit, make it nice and quiet. You'd make sure the other guy was alert and awake during the period. And in order to ensure that he didn't fall asleep as well, then he had to call back into the cabin to the cabin crew every 20 minutes. And if he failed to do that, then the cabin crew would call the cockpit, which was a loud noise and would wake everybody up. So during that period, you were allowed to take a short nap. And the recommended length was between sort of 20 and 40 minutes.
So literally like a sort of power nap type sort of thing, just to sort of recharge the batteries enough.
The idea was to stay in REM sleep so that you could come around and you would be pretty alert very quickly, so you didn't go into very deep sleep, because if you stay asleep for more than about 40 minutes, you go into a really deep sleep, and then you might be a bit discombobulated when you came round. And people have that Canadian guy that came round off a sleep and saw the planet Venus and thought it was another airplane, grabbed all of the controls and dived the airplane down to get out of the way of a planet that was thousands and thousands of miles away.
Right.
So that's kind of what can happen when you wake up and you're not really worked out which way is up yet.
Yeah.
So there were lots of precautions and procedures in the procedure so that that sort of thing didn't happen. But it was very regularly done, particularly on the Atlantic flights back to the UK. So,
So, Nev, based on obviously this story is about the fact that they're talking about pilots essentially having rest in the cabin. I mean, how would you as a passenger feel about that taking place?
Oh, definitely. I mean, sorry. Beg your pardon, I said we've already done that.
Oh, right.
Yeah, I mean, crew fatigue is one of the biggest subjects, isn't it, really? So then they have to do that. They have to make sure that they are rested in the way that suits them. And we all know that just a 20-minute nap, perhaps on a long car journey, for example, I'm always surprised how refreshed I am after that. It's just enough to do a bit of a reset, as it were.
It is,
with a cup of coffee as well, maybe.
Yeah, and you're good for another. And certainly, again, obviously, I mean, I drive in theory professionally for a living, and I'm sort of the same thing, sort of 20 minutes, even if I don't fall asleep, it's surprising that 20 minutes of just shutting your eyes for a bit makes a big difference to sort of how you feel, especially when you I mean, I guess I'm lucky because obviously breaks are built into how I go about what I do, and obviously it's the same for both Jeff and Nick. It's that same sort of same thing, I guess, but there we are. So we'll move on to the next story then, if I may. And Nick, this one should be for you, I think.
Okay, so look, it's a nice Virgin Atlantic airplane. Wow. So it says Virgin Atlantic could purchase A330neos. Why would this be good? Well, any new airplane's got to be good, isn't it, for heaven's sake? So it says Virgin Atlantic could be looking to purchase A330neos for their fleet. Reports suggest that the UK airline is looking at between 6 and 10 of the Airbus aircraft to add to their current lineup and enable retirement of some of their older planes. I'm going to question that because the plan was or is to bring in A350-1000s to retire all the older planes. So it sounds, if this occurs, it's going to be an expansion and not just to replace older airplanes. So Reuters suggested Airbus are close to securing a deal with Virgin for a number of 330neos, and the source says the 330neo is under consideration alongside the 787 Dreamliner, which, of course, the airline already has. According to reports, Virgin could be on the verge of ordering 6 to 10 new aircraft as part of their fleet renewal. Whilst these are no more than rumours just now, Reuters has a habit of getting good inside information, well, they didn't ask me, ahead of the crowd. So we fully expect an announcement soon. They're asking why they would consider the 330neos, and they're saying, well, according to Wiki, they've got 4 Airbus A330-200s, which I can tell you from an inside source were nicknamed the Berlin Bombers because they came from an airline called Air Berlin, and they were very old versions of the A330, so a bit tired. They've got 8 A330-300s, nice new and very izzy-wizzy, 5 340-600s, which are going, 8 747-400s, which are also going, and 17 of the Boeing 787-9s, which, of course, have been suffering with their Rolls-Royce engine problems, so a significant number of those have not been available. Within their fleet, I've just said the A340 and the 74s are going. So whilst the airline does have 12 of the 350-1000s, and they are specky-looking airplanes, they are really shiny, very nice. Impressed with those. And they've got an amazing new upper-class product on board, which I have had a sneak preview of, and also very impressed. As an airline, they're clearly looking to expand. Cutting capacity is not something that would be on their radar. So an additional order of 6 to 10 330neos will certainly replace any lost capacity they might have in seat numbers when they get rid of the big old lovely 747-400s and those 340-600s. They will have lost some seats because the replacement aircraft aren't quite as big. So an additional order would sort of even things out, they're saying. They're saying the 330neo is an interesting airplane. Well, okay, fair enough. Has about 250 seats, excellent range, and is an ideal choice for long, thin routes, giving Virgin the ability to expand into point-to-point services as opposed to their current mainly hub-and-spoke model. This is something we've seen with Emirates, they say, who have ordered 40 of the 330neos as part of their fleet shake-up to give them more point-to-point potential. Virgin are in the midst of a massive investment project at Manchester. So there's a good chance that if they get these aircraft, they may end up flying out of regional airports, which is very much a point-to-point destination. So 330neos could be exciting to see. It would be very welcome out there, I'm sure. They're comparing the 330neo against the Dreamliner, saying that their current fleet already has 17 Dreamliners and 12 330s of the older variants. So it wouldn't actually, the 330neo wouldn't be so much a new aircraft, it would just be more efficient for sure. And so with the Dreamliner operation, why not just get more of the same? It has the capacity, range, and passenger comforts that the company like, and they're already equipped with them. But they mention that many of the Dreamliners have been grounded for weeks following engine issues. So perhaps they're not so keen to take a risk by ordering more. So, in the end of the day, the decision will come down to finance. The 7879 list price. Well, no one pays list price, so. So relevant, is 292.5 million, whereas the 330-800 Neo is 259.9 million. So a little cheaper, but quite honestly, it depends what you negotiate on the day. So the Dash 800 variant of the Neo hasn't proven particularly popular. And if Virgin are looking at the Dash 900, the list price is on a par. It's all going to depend on what kind of a deal they can get on the day. And it's interesting to see that the company is looking to expand. I think now they've got rid of some of their older pilots, and they've got these new young pilots. They're probably looking to fill all the cockpits they can.
Well, this is true. This is true. I mean, I'm asking the wrong person this question, aren't I? But is it Boeing or Airbus for you, sir?
Well, I don't really mind. As a professional pilot, you fly what's put in front of you.
Fair point. Yeah.
If you're getting paid to do a job, you put on their uniform and you fly their aircraft. Really, an opinion on whether you like it or not is irrelevant, because you want a job with a good company with good prospects.
Fair point.
And there are a lot of places where you can't really pick the fleet; you get allocated.
Yeah.
And although Jeff's in a different situation, he could pick a different aircraft type if he wanted. Still, that's a decision that would probably be made equally with lifestyle and remuneration. So not so much, I suspect. Well, we'll ask him what aircraft type it would be that he moved on to. I don't know.
Well, as you say, it's more for me about my seniority, quality of life, and interestingly, I can make more money on the airplane that I'm flying now. I fly one of the narrow bodies in the fleet, one of the smaller narrow bodies, but because of the way it's staffed and overtime flying opportunities, many of our seniority list pilots are making more money than some of the people that are flying the long haul heavy metal. So, it's pay is not necessarily associated with the size of the aircraft.
Not the be all and end all.
Yeah. Interestingly, Liz in the chat room brings up a good point that now Nick, they don't have to pay Nick's salary. No. They are now looking at buying new aircraft and wondering if that's coincidence.
Yeah, they should get a whole fleet now. Yeah.
Anything you'd like to add to that, Nev?
Well, just some inaccuracy in that the article does go on to say that it does say that Delta runs an all Airbus fleet, which is not,
does it?
not
Right.
Really? I didn't know I flew in there. Oh, wait, I don't fly for Delta.
No, I don't know what you mean.
No, it's certainly unusual to have major inaccuracy, isn't it?
Especially
so,
here in the UK,
Indeed, yeah.
And on that particular subject, we'll move on to the next story. This is on the independent.co.uk website. And if this story is true, and I have to confess I am very sceptical these days, then it's a very distressing story, I think, really. So Team GB Paralympic medalist denied access to Ryanair flight after pilot refused to allow him on board. So a bronze medal winning Paralympic basketball player was refused entry to a Ryanair flight after he was told that the pilot would not let him board. Matt Byrne said he felt disgusted after being told he could not get on the flight from Dublin to Birmingham as he waited patiently on a wheelchair lift next to the plane. The wheelchair basketball star, who won bronze for Team GB at Athens in 2004 and Beijing in 2008 and competed at the London 2012 Games, is demanding an apology from the airline for refusing him access. The 44-year-old, again, irrelevant data, told The Independent, "I was waiting on the lift to get on board when a member of staff said the pilot's not taking you. I said, what do you mean he's not taking me? He said, because we're running a bit late. He's refusing to take you." He added, "I don't complain about much, but I was disgusted. It felt cruel and humiliating. It's 2019. You can't have people doing that to you. It's just wrong." Mr. Burns said that he arrived at Dublin Airport at 6:45 p.m, leaving plenty of time to tell staff from OCS, the company that operates the lift for disabled passengers, that he required assistance to get on the flight at 8:50 p.m. He said there had been a slight delay of around 5 minutes getting the lift ready to take him on board before he was told that the pilot was refusing to take him. After being denied his place on the plane, he had to wait over 2.5 hours to board the next one, leaving for Birmingham. Mr. Byrne is paraplegic, meaning that he has an impairment in motor or sensory function of the lower extremities. Mr. Burns said long hours of chair sitting can increase the risk of pressure sores. The next flight was delayed until 11:30 p.m, so I didn't finally get back to Nottingham until 2:30 in the morning. The whole journey from Dublin city centre took around 9 hours. I could have gone to America in that time. He added, "I haven't had a good explanation. The pilot must have seen me waiting on the lift. It takes 5 minutes to lift me on." Now, I'm not going to read any more of that story. One thing that I have to say, obviously, I've been involved in a similar situation, not me personally, but with somebody I was flying with. And in my experience, those with, shall we say, who require special assistance to go on the plane are normally boarded first. That's the first time that I've ever known a situation where they haven't been boarded first. Now, maybe I'm reading between the lines. The one thing, and this could be the fault of the Independent, so I apologise if I'm speaking out of turn here, but one thing that concerns me a little bit is that in order to gain access to special services or special assistance, you need to have informed the airline you're flying with in advance of you arriving at the airport. And certainly this story has given me the impression to think that he didn't do that until he arrived at the airport. So whilst I'm sort of sorry that he feels like he was treated very unfairly by the airline, and he may well be right in that, my understanding was that if I'm very surprised if they did know that he was coming in advance. I'm very surprised that that's the decision that was made by the captain. I don't know what our friends have to say about that. I mean, obviously the rules may well be different for you, Jeff, perhaps in the US. I don't know how you would comment, perhaps.
Well, the airlines are really trying hard to keep everything running on schedule, and I agree with you, Matt. In most cases in the airline for which I fly, we board the people with the disabilities before regular passenger boarding. Mm-hmm. Now, sometimes, out of their control, they may have a connecting flight or whatever and may arrive at the airplane in the midst of the boarding process and be boarded mid-process or at the end. Again, not their fault, usually. It may have been just a judgment call by the captain that we need to keep this schedule going, and I'm using my judgment at this point to see that by the time, if we wait for this all to take place, it's going to result in a late departure. So it's hard to say. We weren't there. We don't know all the details here. I'm pretty sure it has nothing to do with somebody discriminating against someone because they are disabled.
Well, and this is the thing, and as I say, I'm personally beginning to feel that perhaps the reason why is perhaps for some reason they didn't know that he required special assistance until he got to the airport.
Mm-hmm.
And
it may have been also that the third party, the company that actually provides the lift, maybe they dropped the ball in some way.
Yeah,
So,
I'd agree, Jeff. There's a good chance that the intermediate company is the one that didn't do a particularly good job. They've refused to comment, I notice.
Yeah.
Once the captain has realised that he's got a disabled passenger who is hasn't been loaded in the normal sequence, i.e. first, to trying to get them on or at the end of the flight just before departure is going to be problematic.
Yeah.
So it may have been his call, and there's no such thing really as just being 5 minutes late on a really busy short haul outfit, because that delay will just bounce down through the day, and by the end of the day it's going to be you just can't, there's enough flex to pick that time up again, I suspect. So it's probably a pretty hard and fast rule that they have a very firm doors closed time.
And there is obviously, usually there is a reason why that sort of thing is dealt with first before all the other people are getting on board. I mean, that's why they usually load
exactly right.
Exactly. So I'm very sad that this guy's had a negative experience, but I'm not normally one to stand up for Ryanair, I have to be honest. But I do feel that we're missing some key elements of the story. I think that's a fair comment. Anything to add, Nev?
No.
Fair enough. Okay. So as you are in the chair then, sir, we'll leave you to take on the next story, if we may.
Yeah, it's an interesting news and a positive bit of news from BA for a change. It's on the Greater Kashmir
I beg your
website,
pardon?
And
Say that again?
The Greater Kashmir website.
Right,
the
okay. You've
one
been buying
that
jumpers again?
No, not recently.
Okay.
But it says that Pakistan welcomed the first British Airways flight on Monday after a decade-long absence due to security fears, with ministers saying it will boost business, trade and tourism between the South Asian nation and Britain. BA's Boeing 787 Dreamliner landed in Islamabad from Heathrow Airport to begin a three flights per week service. Pakistan's civil aviation spokesman Farah Hussain said. High-ranking Pakistani and British embassy officials welcomed the flight, which returned to Britain the same day. With this kind of connectivity that we now have, British investors will find it so easy. Pakistani diaspora will find it very easy. Our own exporters, our own business people will now have a greater connectivity of going from here to London, said Pakistan's Trade Industry Minister Abdul Razak Dawood. From London, the whole world is open to us. The British High Commissioner, Thomas Drew, and BA's Chief Commercial Officer, Andrew Brem, called on Prime Minister Imran Khan, who said that the resumption of the BA flights to Pakistan will boost tourism in the country and encourage increased trade and investment. The links between Britain and Pakistan are already extraordinary, from commerce, cricket and culture to people, politics and education, Drew added. This launch is a vote of confidence in the future of those links. If you remember, BA halted services to Pakistan following the 2008 Marriott Hotel bombing in the capital Islamabad, which took place during a period of devastating Islamist militant violence in Pakistan. Security has improved since, with militant attacks sharply down in the mainly Muslim country of 208 million people, reviving Pakistan as a destination for tourists and investors. At present, the only loss-making national carrier, Pakistan International Airlines, flies directly from Pakistan to Britain, but its aging fleet of planes is a frequent source of complaints by passengers. BA's Andrew Brem said that the airline decided to resume operations due to increasing demand and the improved security situation in Pakistan. The priority for us is to fly where our passengers want to go, and we absolutely had a demand to travel to Islamabad, he told a news conference. Well, that's some good news, isn't it? And of course, actually organising these routes, it's not just a question of, filing a flight plan and choosing a crew, and off you go. I mean, countries and continents that are barely speaking to each other fly operations and services between them. So these routes take a long time to negotiate, and especially if there's been a big security concern. Obviously, safety is their greatest priority, so they want to make sure that everything's okay. But it's good to see after such a long gap that BA is flying back to Pakistan again.
Perhaps they'll use the 747, Nev, that they're no longer using on domestic routes, as we mentioned earlier.
Maybe that's why.
Maybe that's why.
The 747s are not available.
There you are.
There we are.
Very good point. I don't suppose it's going to be the most popular trip to bid for, Jeff?
Probably not.
No.
Not high on the places you want to go.
I would be high on my list of places to go visit.
Okay, can't imagine why.
I'm sure it's lovely.
I don't doubt that for a nanosecond. Okay, I guess Captain Jeff, that would be you next, I think.
Oh, me. Yeah, this is from New Zealand's News Hub. More faults found on Boeing's 787 Dreamliners. Aircraft manufacturer Boeing has been hit with yet another setback after U.S. authorities discovered issues with the 787-8 and 787-9 Dreamliners' wheels and braking systems. Certain areas in the tire wheel zones could be susceptible to damage, which could result in loss of braking on one of the main landing gear, loss of nose wheel steering, and loss of directional control on the ground. Yeah, that's no big deal, said the Federal Aviation Administration in an advisory. It applies to fewer than 100 Boeing Dreamliners currently in operation. Just 2 days ago, the FAA ruled further changes needed to be made to Boeing's 737 MAX jets, including all that have been currently grounded and some that are still flying. The grounding was put in place after 2 of them crashed within weeks. Well, I don't know why they're throwing this all in here. I guess to show how bad Boeing is. So let's move on to this issue, the 787. It's not known if Air New Zealand, which has a fleet of 787-9s and has just invested in 787-10s, will be affected. News Hub has contacted the airline for comment. Apparently, they haven't gotten back with them. Financial estimates put the cost to airlines per aircraft at approximately $5 million US dollars, or $7.5 million New Zealand dollars. In addition to the changes, airlines must conduct detailed inspections of other parts of the Dreamliner aircraft too, following reports lightning strikes had caused dangerous hydraulic leakage. Ooh, that's embarrassing. Leakage.
Family show, ladies and gentlemen. Family show.
Sorry. Looks like, just more things to pile on the top of the ailing Boeing Industries, Boeing company. And, I remember reading something about some kind of an issue regarding this months ago, and maybe it's just that the FAA has gotten around to finally putting out the advisory regarding it. But it looks like it's not affecting too many of them. Roughly, a quarter of the Dreamliners in the fleet? I'm not sure.
I mean, do you think a lot of this, and I'm aware that Boeing are not making the headlines perhaps for all the usual good reasons, if that makes sense. Do you think some of this is the fact that the media have basically pounced on any vaguely Boeing-related story in the hope that they can get more inaccurate mileage out of it?
I think that, I think that the case could be made for that. I think that's true in anything. When you are made aware of something and then all of a sudden you're paying closer attention to it. So anytime you see anything that has Boeing in the news, you're going to, as you said, it's good for ratings and good for clicks on the internet.
Yes, clickbait, as they call it. It's and that's a big problem, I think, here in the UK especially. I mean, you sort of they'll make up a story that's not really. It's got a sensational headline for a nothing story, which is just it's one of the. Nev, I know you'll agree with me wholeheartedly on this. This is one of the big bugbears I have with the media at the moment. Is they're doing this. I mean, they're doing this all the time, aren't they?
Yeah, and sorry, I've done it again. The problem is really this 24-hour news business and social media, it seems that accuracy is optional, if at all required, and anything that they can have a go at, they will. I think the problem is as well that, let's be honest, when Airbus first came out with their A320, there were some problems there, and Boeing had problems with the 747 when it originally came out, and I'm sure Embraer and other manufacturers did as well.
Jeff, you had your hand up.
Happen because
when he was talking about inaccuracy in the media, was that some kind of a backhanded comment regarding our podcast? I'm just wondering. I think I kind of felt that. No.
Yeah, I said that home to me too.
But honestly, you try to maintain your 50% accuracy rating, so at least that's a noble goal as a starting point.
Yes,
it is.
Absolutely.
We're actually recalibrating that, and we're calling it the average. And actually, it's going to be 25% now. Will be your average.
We're not
telling people that.
To be fair, the way that the British media is these days, and I'm very sorry to say, but I mean, I'm a big lover of the BBC. Anybody who knows me knows that I love the BBC, and it saddens me greatly that even that fantastic institution is as guilty of this sort of like sensational headline type thing. So, frankly, guys, if you're aiming for 45% accuracy and achieving it, then I still think you're onto a winner versus most of the UK's media. It's
not just limited to aviation. Today I heard a report on the BBC about tennis. Not normally my sport of choice, but I know Liz is a very keen tennis fan. But they were talking about the British female tennis player Johanna Konta, and they said she was trounced in the semi-final. And it turns out she lost 7-6, 7-5. I mean, that's
right.
Exactly
that's hardly a thrashing, is it?
But by any stretch of the imagination. So it's not just limited to aviation. It's all over the place.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, let's choose our adjectives a little bit better.
Yeah, no, I agree wholeheartedly. As I say, and this is the thing. It's like, yes, we're all familiar with the Mac story. It's an awful story. There is obviously a problem there, but it's just like, but then it's the same with air shows, isn't it? There was this whole, there was one very awful. I'm not trying to make, obviously the Shoreham air crash was horrendous. There's no two ways about it. But every single there's been little incidences at air shows. I'm sure correct me somebody obviously if I say something that's wrong here, but there's been little incidences that have been occurring for as long as air shows have ever existed, but because of the Shoreham terrible incident, the media is now pouncing on anything to do with air shows, almost like they're actively trying to shut them down, or they're trying to sort of they've decided that their campaign is that all air shows are dangerous and therefore that's their agenda now and stuff like that. It really winds me up.
Mm-hmm. It should.
Anyway, sorry. I'll shut up now.
But it does smack of the media vultures circling.
Yeah.
As soon as you get a theme, everyone wants to jump on it, anything that even is similar. And from that point of view, I feel very sorry for Boeing that everybody's zoning in on them right now.
Yeah, sort of picking them for that. While you're in the chair then, Nick, I wonder if I could trouble you to move on with the next story, please.
Well, it's from North Wales Live. You mean there are people live in North Wales?
Stop it.
There, and I never saw it.
Behave.
Okay. Hi, North Wales. I was only checking. I love you, really. Airbus take off for airlines business class only plane.
Ooh.
Okay, so a luxury Airbus plane, we call it an aircraft, or at the most an aeroplane, but plane, no. A luxury Airbus plane that will provide a business class only. We've heard of this before. Service across the Atlantic has taken off. Oh, very well written, sir. The first single-aisle A321neo is destined for La Compagnie, an exclusively business-class French airline, which, sorry for my pronunciation, by the way, operating scheduled transatlantic flights. Airbus has already secured a number of orders for the A321neo jet, including a recent order for 25 from China Airlines. Whilst the first delivery is to the exclusive airline, the jet can be configured into various cabin options with a maximum of 244 seats. Not really irrelevant, considering this is going to be fairly luxurious with lots of room. They definitely want to have that many seats. The services on this aircraft commenced today from Paris Orly Airport to Newark Liberty International. On lease from GCAS, La Compagnie's A321neo is powered by CFM International LEAP-1A new generation engines and features a business class only cabin with 76, there you go, seats that go full flat, offering passengers unmatched comfort. I'm not quite sure they'll be able to live up to that boast, since there are some pretty comfortable places you can fly. Cabin also includes a high level of connectivity on board. And an Airbus spokesman said, selected for their outstanding operational efficiency, comfort and range, these new generation single aisle aircraft, and that's a bit of a problem, isn't it, if you want to get to the loo and there's a trolley in the way, allow the French carrier to benefit from better fuel efficiency, excuse my whistling teeth, and lower operating costs on its transatlantic New York-Paris route. With this brand, the A321neo becomes, La Compagnie becomes the latest operator. The airline has two more A321neos on order. So therein lies the problem with these, and we've seen a few in the past. These business class only, specialist people, companies that want to offer a luxury service. It's all very well, and they can usually undercut a business class ticket on a regular airline, but with one aircraft turning into three aircraft, the problem usually comes with unserviceabilities and breakdowns in their schedule, which, if you're going to pay a few £1,000s to get across the Atlantic, even if it's less than the average, is not ideal. You want to have a guaranteed service.
Yes, and of course, if it is an all business class configuration, and the plane does go tech for whatever reason, you know, with most aircraft, I mean, how many is it? Sort of like 40 usually? Is it in, say, business class? Or what are the numbers normally? I suppose it depends.
We have about 45 on one of our big Airbuses. Yeah.
So this is the thing. It's like, you know, if it's an all business class flight and it goes tech, there's going to be an awful lot of very cross people, even if they do change it for another aircraft.
They're going to end up in economy, and a lot of them end up in economy on another airline, crammed in because now the airplane's absolutely chocker. So not brilliant.
Lovely idea, but
well, it is. But we've seen Silver Wings did it, and we've seen other companies try it, and there's not one airline has managed to come out of the end of it looking good. They usually disappear within 5 years.
Yes. Oh, well, anyway, on to the next story. This is on the BBC, so it's bbc.co.uk or bbc.com if you're outside the UK, and the headline is London Luton's airport noise assessment is inadequate. London Luton, that always makes me laugh. Luton Airport's
inadequate, basically.
Right.
The noise assessment.
Noise is the least of its
That's another story entirely.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Noise is the anyway. We'll carry on, shall we? London Luton's airport bid to relax noise limits has not adequately considered the adverse impact on residents, a report has said. The airport applied to its owners, Luton Borough Council, to lift the noise conditions it applied for when it asked for planning permission to expand. But noise consultants Cole Jarman said it had not offered any mitigation against the increased noise levels. The airport said it would respond fully to the report. Luton Airport applied for permission to relax noise control after an unexpectedly quick expansion of passenger numbers. The council ordered the assessment by independent professionals in its role as the local planning authority to assess the impacts of the airport operator's planning application to vary Condition 10, which limits the amount of noise the airport is allowed to make. It sets limits on its noise footprint, an area inside which the average noise is higher than a given amount. Cole Jarman's report concluded the airport's noise assessment provided in its application was inadequate inadequate in that it does not provide a sufficient description of the adverse effects likely to arise and offers no effective means of mitigating significant adverse effects. Airport Operations Manager Neil Thompson said, "We note the comments from the local authority and will respond to them fully as part of the ongoing planning process. London Luton Airport adheres to some of the strictest noise control measures of any major UK airport. However, due to faster than predicted passenger growth, we are seeking a temporary variation to just one of those many controls to allow time for newer, quieter models of aircraft to be introduced." Andrew Lambourne from Luton and District Association for the Control of Aircraft Noise said, "The expert report vindicates our position and exposes the total lack of concern which the airport has for its local residents." Luton Borough Council said, "We are still considering the application and cannot make any further comments at this time." I mean, you know, if you live in Luton or if you live near Luton Airport, I guess you shouldn't be surprised there may be slightly higher noise levels, in the same way that people used to complain when I was a landlord of a pub, because the pub that has stood there for 350 years is prone to making a little bit of extra noise on a Friday evening.
Well, yes, and I think the other thing is about this, let's be honest, the sort of aircraft that operate out of Luton are extremely modern A320s, 737-800s with the latest engines. They're not running BAC-111s or, I nearly said MD-80 series, but I just stopped short, or 727s, you know, pre-hush kitted stuff. You know, it's all very modern and it's all relatively quiet. And I'm actually quite surprised. I was around there the other day, just under the flight path when they were taking off. It's not that noisy, really, compared to even 10 years ago. You know? But,
yeah,
I don't live there, so
this is true. I mean, presumably they have similar things like this in the States, Jeff, where obviously, you know, if an airport is in a sort of, you know, a built-up area, they have noise restrictions.
Oh yeah, yeah. Many of the airports we operate into and out of have special noise abatement procedures to try to minimize the noise to the surrounding communities, and, you know, specialized flight paths depending on the weather conditions, and also preferred runways to use, again, to, you know, mitigate the noise issue.
So I'm going to ask a question here. This is perhaps the wrong crowd to ask this to, but would noise from an airport bother you, Jeff?
No, because I love the noise of airplanes flying around.
Yeah, this is. I mean, Nev, if your house was under Heathrow's flight path, you know, are you likely to be bothering air traffic control with pointless emails?
Two things would be happening there. I would be a single man,
right?
Definitely, because Mrs. Nev doesn't sleep very well at the best of times.
Okay, right.
So that would be that. But I mean, don't tell her, but I'd be quite happy with that. So maybe I could just have a little apartment somewhere, you know, for the weekends.
Now,
but no, I mean, you know. So.
Nick, as a recently retired gentleman of aviation.
Nice of you to say, gentlemen. Thank you.
Absolutely. It's the one and only time. Make the most of it. There is. How does one? I mean, I know you still love aviation, but I mean, would that now kind of be your idea of your worst nightmare, listening to these planes flying over you all the time?
No, not really. I spent 20 years of my life on military bases with a Marine Corps that was usually right under the circuit, so a mile, 2 miles from the base, and they were flying jet fighters, you know, all hours of the day. So, no, I have absolutely no problem at all with jet noise. I love looking up. The only time it becomes a problem is, you know, if you're trying to have a nice afternoon party and there are airliners coming over at 100 feet all the time. But no, normally absolutely no problem at all.
Yeah, I was just asking the I've got two people sat in the studio with me here, and I was just asking them actually. They said they wouldn't mind either. To be fair, it wouldn't actually bother them at all. Hey, you'll get told off for that. So, yeah.
I suspect there's a certain element of what can I get out of the
Yes.
airport to
Yes.
compensate me for what apparently is.
And also, in most cases, of course, the airport has been there, like in the same situation as the pub that I ran that was 350 years old. It's been there a lot longer than most of the people that, living there. If you're really that bothered by it, don't move there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I don't have a lot of sympathy.
Okay, no, indeed. So on to the next story then, please, Senev. That is with you, I think.
Another positive British Airways story. We're on a real roll here now, aren't we? So it's on the travelweekly.co.uk, and it says that a 96-year-old Second World War veteran and former British Airways pilot has returned to the cockpit some 45 years after retiring. Frank Dell was able to sit in a cockpit once again as part of British Airways' commitment to 100 acts of kindness across the world as part of its centenary celebration. The former RAF pilot flew over Germany in the Second World War before flying for British Airways between 1946 and 1976. The veteran was born in Hove, East Sussex in 1923, but now resides in a Bupa care home in Sydney, Australia. Being a pilot, he said that being a pilot was beyond the reach of average people like me in terms of the cost. Then the war came along and paved the way for me to learn to fly. When my time came to be released, there was no job for me in the Air Force. So I started with British European Airways. It was amazing to see how much pre-war flying and training came into the category of what we were doing then. It was a great privilege to work for British European Airways, and now an incredibly proud moment to help them celebrate their 100th birthday and to be back in the cockpit again. It's over 30 years since I was last in the cockpit, and I never thought I'd be here again. Whilst the technology has changed, there are so many things that have stayed the same, and it's brought back some wonderful memories. Frank and his late wife Isabel moved to Australia in 2000 to be closer to their grandchildren, but after his wife died, he moved into the Bupa St Ives care home in Sydney in 2018. Reba Hatcher, manager of the Bupa St Ives care home, who put the idea to British Airways, said, "It's so important for us as carers to celebrate the lives and achievements of our residents and to shine the spotlight on what makes them so unique." Well, it's a very nice gesture, and I think very well received by Frank there, definitely.
Absolutely. What a lovely story.
It is a lovely story. I've got a question there. What's British Airways maths like? Because if you add 100 years onto the 31st of March 1974, I make it the 31st of March 2074. Now, forgive me, but I don't think this is 2074 quite yet.
Oh
no! You see, what you've done there, you've made an obvious comment, which we were all thinking, but dare not mention. But of course,
well, that it's not actually 100 years old.
Yeah, there's a lot of, and also when they say that he flew for British Airways between 1946 and 1976, which I don't think he could have been doing because British Airways wasn't actually called British Airways then at all.
Yeah,
so it was,
he flew for BEA.
Yes, yeah. But,
yeah, I know,
hey,
but Mr. Joe Bloggs won't get all that. Obviously, it won't mean anything to them.
Oh yeah, let's not bother with accuracy.
No, quite.
Yeah. Well, after all, we don't. So why should anybody else?
yeah, true.
Interesting. Going back to the part where he was flying in the Second World War, I was watching a documentary on television the other day, and of course, in peacetime, there's a lot of attention paid to pilot training and the hours and hours and hours of line training and simulator. And these Second World War pilots, I can't remember what documentary it was I was watching this week. I mean, some of them had 3 hours, 4 hours in the cockpit before they were actually on active duty. Absolutely incredible because of the war effort was so intense, and it's always worth remembering, isn't it, about how inexperienced these people were before they actually got into the air.
Absolutely. I mean, they usually had a bit more total flying, but their time on type was often very limited.
Yeah, very much so.
Indeed. Okay, we're going to move on to the next story then, if we may. And Jeff, I think this one will be with you.
If we must.
I know. I'm sorry. Oh, that looks jolly nice where you are, sir.
Yeah, I've moved outside to the beach. We're getting a little stuffy inside.
Right.
Let's see. Passengers this is from Isle of Wight Radio. Passengers, although it's not radio, it's a web page. But anyway, passengers at Southampton Airport found themselves at the center of the very special international events to mark the 75th anniversary of D-Day, when Air Force One and heads of state from across Europe landed at the airport. Yesterday morning, aircraft from across the globe were welcomed on the runway as dignitaries flew en route to the commemorative events in Portsmouth. They included the heads of state for Poland, Czech Republic, Greece, Luxembourg, and the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, all at the Isle of Wight's nearest international airport. Later in the day, passengers were stunned to view close up the arrival of Air Force One, followed by the Marine One helicopter carrying President Donald Trump on his return trip from Portsmouth. The specially marked Boeing 757 departed for the president's next stop in Ireland before heading for Normandy. Prime Minister Theresa May also passed through the airport on her way to the events today on the beaches of Normandy. Extra staff were on duty to deliver the extra special airside operations, and there was a large police presence around the entire airport campus to ensure everything went smoothly. The managing director of the airport, Neil Garwood, said, "From the first flight of the Spitfire off our airfield, 1936, to the thousands of troops stationed here throughout the conflict, our airport is indelibly linked with World War II. It is very humbling to be able to play even a small part in these magnificent commemorative events, and we are extremely proud to have been able to bring so many nations together to recognize the sacrifices made 75 years ago. We may not see a day like this for a very long while, and it will live long in the memory of everyone who works here." There you go.
It's a wonderful story. I mean, actually, he was very well behaved, I have to be honest, during his visit here in Blighty, and it was nice to sort of have the special relationship, if you like, sort of underlined, I think. Especially given the weirdness, I'm not allowed to say that word. I know the word Brexit, but it was very interesting, and it was quite nice to sort of see the thing down in Plymouth. Actually, was very moving. I don't know if you saw perhaps any. I don't know if you got much coverage of that in the States, where
Yes,
you've got the sort of the big D-Day thing going on. It was really quite special.
Very much so. Now, this article, I just thought I'd point out, many people, well, if you're watching the video and you saw the photograph put up from the article, and as they mentioned here in the story, it was a 757. And some people would say, well, that's not Air Force One. Air Force One is a 747. Well, no, Air Force One is whatever airplane or it is when the president is on board.
Right. Okay.
So.
Now, because they haven't got the new ones yet, are they? Because they are changing.
Yeah, they're getting newer 747s, but it's going to look almost identical to what most people think of as Air Force One right now.
So, I mean, I know you're not part. You know, obviously you're not speaking on behalf of him. But any idea why they changed to the 75 rather than the usual 74?
Yeah, it's a matter of the availability of field length, runway, whatever's best suited for wherever they're going to be flying into.
Right.
So I'm guessing that one of the places, probably wherever they flew into for the D-Day ceremonies, Normandy, I guess maybe that airport perhaps wasn't really suited for the 747.
Fair point. Because he arrived here at Stansted. So I mean that takes 380s and stuff. So it won't have been. It's unlikely to have been Stansted. And I guess I don't know. Was it? I dare say our vision mixer will correct me. I think it was Shannon he flew into. I've got a feeling. Yeah. Well, Nev's back. Yeah. Sorry, it was Shannon that he flew into. from there. So yeah, perhaps it was Normandy. Perhaps that's why they couldn't go in the usual. I do hope it had at least business class for him. I mean, I'd hate to think he was uncomfortable.
Well, it's a specially configured VIP transport from the what is it, the 89th squadron that does all that kind of flying here for the U.S. Air Force.
Indeed. Good. Okay, so we move on to the next story then, if we may, please. Nick, that's with you.
Okay, this is from Flight Global, who actually have a reasonable reputation. So they're saying Iranian investigators have disclosed that an ATR 72-500 captain ignored repeated suggestions from the first officer not to proceed with a landing at Tehran during a storm before the aircraft sustained damage during touchdown. So, and the Iran Arsman Airlines, I might not have pronounced that quite right.
Oh, you're an Arsman.
Yeah, the Iran family show. The Iran Eastman Airlines. The aircraft Echo Papa Alpha Tango X-ray conducted an unstable approach in adverse weather with high acceleration levels, says the Iranian Civil Aviation Organization. States that the turboprop arriving from Rasht on the 11th of June last year was traveling at 168 knots below 2,000 feet. Well, I'm thinking that even for an ATR, that doesn't seem to be particularly fast. Despite a limitation of 145 knots. Now, I wonder what that limitation would be. I would have thought the flaps would have been okay at that speed. I don't know. Any ATR drivers out there can help me? And it was descending at more than 1,000 feet a minute when it passed through 850 feet. Well, it's a tad high, but a normal descent rate would be 800 feet a minute, around there. So not unusually high if it's just transitory. The crew received glide slope warnings. Well, that is a worry. And then ground proximity warnings at 810 feet. And that really is a worry. So
that's not good.
Yeah, at that point, no, best laid plans, best we go around. However, they continued. Upon touchdown, the aircraft bounced 4 times with a maximum impact of 1.9 Gs, which is pretty impressive. The inquiry refers to non-compliance with crew resource management practice, stating that the captain did not pay attention to the first officer's suggestions to divert to Isfahan or hold or execute go-rounds at different points during the flight. So it sounds like he was trying to do anything he could to get his captain not to try and land, but the chap wasn't listening. It was part of a chain of errors by the captain, and then he failed to comply with requirements regarding takeoff or landing in thunderstorm zones, and that included prohibiting landing if a storm involved lightning and wind shear within 5 miles of an airport. That's quite a restrictive limitation. I think I've at least had that within 5 miles of an airport, but so we're not so cut and dried with that, but obviously in Iran they are. The weather data show that there were QNIMs at 3,500 feet and thunderstorm around. Captain claimed that a forecast from Rasht had mistakenly predicted light stormy conditions, but as Jeff's holding his hand up, you don't land on what the forecasts say. You land on what the actual conditions are when you get there. So I think that's a pretty weak defense myself. Yeah. The inquiry said the captain demonstrated no situational awareness regarding information from other flights who were presumably all diverting, and Tehran Mehrabad airport controllers, and relied instead on his visual interpretation of the weather. Well, I suspect his visual interpretation was marred. Perhaps he had blinkers or was using Nelson's eye. Investigators rejected suggestions that the aircraft had insufficient fuel to divert, stating that it had enough to fly to Isfahan.
Obviously, he had a hot date.
That's what it was. Yeah, exactly.
Either that or Either that or the ribs are really good there. Perhaps that's what it is.
Could be, yeah. They got a branch of dinosaur there.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything's possible.
You know what he heard, though, like about a week ago, he heard that the weather was going to be fine that day.
He got his app on his phone and said, "Oh, it's good."
Yeah, let's stay
none
here.
of the 68 occupants were injured, but the ATR sustained damage to its nose wheels and components, including probes, windows, and static discharges. Oh, that sounds really weird selection of things to. There you go. So I don't think he did a very good job.
No, fair point. Right, okay. Before we move on, I think it's just worth mentioning there's a certain very special guest in the chat room at the moment, and that is the lovely Jenny in Rome, and it's also her birthday today. So as I haven't got Carlos here in the studio with me, I wonder, Jeff, if you could perhaps join me in singing a little song with me.
Okay, will there be much latency involved here?
Probably. It'll probably be horrendous,
Okay.
but we'll give it a go.
Okay.
So, a happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you.
You keep going.
Happy birthday, dear Jenny. Happy birthday to you. Lovely, excellent. Only dogs can hear us now. Absolutely. Happy birthday, Jenny. Dear, that was horrendous. Well done, chaps.
Yeah, that's a problem when you're trying to do this with this kind of.
Absolutely. Oh dear, never mind. So that is, believe it or not, where we bring the commercial segment to a close. Next up, we have a very nice little piece of video that Nev and I took from Duxford. Perhaps you could fill us in, sir.
Yes, we were in Duxford, weren't we, a few weeks ago, and the weather was lovely, very nice indeed. Captain Nick joined us as well, and whilst the other guys were over at the American hangar, Matt and I came across a British Airways BAC-111, which we decided we would have a look at, and here we are.
Well, we can't be at Duxford and be so close to a BA aircraft without chatting to the man that is essentially BA. Hello, Nev.
Yes, here we are. Very sunny Duxford indeed, isn't it? And we are standing in front of a British Airways BAC-111, which was never known as the quietest aircraft going, to say the least. They did bring out versions which had hush kits on, which made them slightly more environmentally friendly. But it was a very popular aircraft, especially on the shorter haul and the European sectors as well. But in fact, there was quite a big incident with a BAC-111 of British Airways, which was flying from Birmingham to Malaga. It was flight 5390, and it diverted to Southampton because the captain got sucked out of the cockpit due to a windshield failure. So to say that was a bit of paperwork to fill out was an understatement.
You're not kidding. As a nervous flyer, that's not really something that I sort of thought was even vaguely possible.
No, it's not ideal. Let's say that. It's not ideal. Okay. But in fact, they held on to his legs, and although he actually became unconscious at one point, he did actually survive the whole thing to tell the tale. And it was due to some rivets that were put into the windshield that weren't the correct size. So it actually failed when the aircraft pressurised. So, but there we go.
What sort of altitude?
I can't remember off the top of my head, but I would imagine it would be beyond 10,000 feet, something like that.
Right. That's right, because we've got Dave over there who has been feeding us all the information. We sound like we've been really smart about this, but somebody's been feeding us the information.
That's what I like about our plain talking UK listeners.
They know more about us
they
we
know
do,
more about it than we do. And
leave it with Dave's looking up now. We'll have that answer for you in a moment.
Well, they should, yes. Yeah. But anyway, it's been a great day here, isn't it? Been superb and great to see everybody coming along, and I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, at last count, we've got about 25 people who've all turned up, which is just fantastic. Really, really excited. And as I say, we couldn't have asked for better weather.
Next up, ice creams.
Oh. And that is exactly what we did, of course. We wandered off and went and had an ice cream immediately. Actually, I have to confess, Nev, there was a fabulous sunburn brewing there nicely already.
Oh yes, no, it was one of those days where you thought, oh, it's not that bad. And of course, as usual, I took my sun cream with me, but actually failed to put any on. So that was
yes,
not particularly.
Slight technical fail.
Works better when you actually use it.
Yeah, that's it, isn't it? Yes, that's what it's all about. So.
Absolutely.
Yes.
That's what my wife says about my head, my brain.
Yes.
You know, it really works well if you
Heads?
use it.
Who said head?
What I meant was,
Family show, ladies and gentlemen, family show. Right, okay. Before we get into even more trouble, I think perhaps we should move on to the military then. So although Armando isn't here this week, he has very kindly sent us all in the stories. So if we are ready, gentlemen,
We are.
let's go.
Ready.
And so the first story this week then is on India today, and the headline is Air Force AN32 transport plane missing after takeoff from Assam. Search ops to continue overnight. So the last contact with the aircraft, an Antonov AN32 military transport aircraft, was at around 1 p.m. today, although I'm not sure when this was actually released, so apologies for that. That was June the 3rd, sorry, so going back to June the 3rd. So an Indian Air Force transport aircraft has gone missing after taking off from an airbase in Assam. The last contact with the aircraft, an Antonov AN32 military transport aircraft, was at around 1 p.m. today. This was, June the 3rd. 13 people were on board the plane, including 8 crew members and 5 passengers. The Indian Air Force has deployed all available resources, including a Sukhoi Su-30 combat fighter jets and C-130 Hercules Special Operations aircraft to locate the missing plane. Troops in the ground too have fanned out to hunt for the missing AN-32. In a tweet posted a few hours after the AN-32 went missing, the Indian Air Force said that the search operations for the missing plane will continue into the night. The Air Force said some reports were received of the sighting of a possible crash site. However, those reports did not turn out to be true. The Antonov AN-32 had taken off from Jorat in Assam and was heading to I want to say Mehuta. Is that? I hope. Apologies if that's incorrect. Advanced landing ground located in Mehuta Valley. In a place I also cannot pronounce. I'm very sorry. I wonder Arunachal Pradesh. The plane lost contact around 35 minutes after taking off. In July 2016, Indian Air Force AN-32 transport aircraft disappeared off the Bay of Bengal with 29 people on board. The plane had taken off from an airbase in Chenzai and was headed to Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Radar contact with the plane was lost around an hour after the AN-32 took off from said base. Following the disappearance, the Indian Air Force launched what later became India's largest search operation for a missing plane over the sea. However, the aircraft was never found, and search operations were called off on the September the 2016th. So not good news really when these things happened. And I noticed from looking into this story earlier, no further updates. So I assume it's still very much missing.
The ocean is a very big place, as all of those who knew someone who perished on the Malaysian aircraft are well aware. And even something as big as that airliner can disappear with barely a trace.
Yeah, it's not good. Anyway, we'll move on, Nev.
I noticed they launched a fighter, a Sukhoi Su-30 combat fighter, to go out and find it. So perhaps if it hadn't crashed, they were going to shoot it down. I don't know. I'm just curious to know why they'd send a fighter out, because, compared with a proper search and rescue aircraft, very limited range. and you're whizzing along. So
okay, it's perhaps
quite
going a little
easy.
fast for spotting anything.
Well, you can slow them down. You have to land at some point, so it can fly quite slowly. But just seems an unusual choice of aircraft to go search for it. But perhaps it was just all they had available at the time.
Indeed. Nev, I'll pass the next story to you, if I may.
Thank you, Matt. And it's on flightglobal.com, the website that we like because it's got an easy font to read. It says that Boeing is working on potential international deals related to its KC-46A tanker and the 737-based E-7 airborne early warning and control aircraft. The company has delivered 11 KC-46As to the US Air Force and aims to have 18 delivered by the second quarter and somewhere between 36 and 40 by the end of this year, says Boeing Vice President Jeff Shockey, speaking with reporters in Singapore in late May. We are moving along and working closely with the customer on those deliveries, he said. Feedback is positive from operators. The figure of a possible 40 deliveries is 4 units higher than recent guidance from Boeing, which stated that 36 deliveries were targeted by year end. Shockey also addressed the highly publicised foreign object debris issues that halted the KC-46A deliveries earlier this year. You've read some of the issues that we've had on KC-46A with FOD, he says. That's something that embarrasses us and really makes us want to go all in to figure out what we need to do as a company to execute better for our customers. It's very humbling when we have a stumble like this on a really key program. Shockey also revealed that there are 6 KC-46A sales opportunities globally for up to 20 aircraft. These are in Indonesia, Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, NATO, Norway, and Japan. Of these, Japan already has orders for this type, but the UAE is a surprise given that it already operates the KC-46A's rival, the Airbus Defence and Space A330 multi-role tank transport. Shockey says that the UAE may obtain 3 tankers to add to its fleet of 3 A330 MRTTs. Airbus, when asked about the UAE's tanker plans, directed queries to Abu Dhabi. Shockey adds that there is potential to sell 10 additional E-7 AEW&C platforms internationally. He declined to specify which countries are interested in the capability, however. We have interest from a number of countries that I'm not at liberty to talk about, he said, and there seems to be a resurgence in the E-7. Seoul, at least, has stated interest in adding a pair of AEW&C assets to its existing fleet of 4 E-7s. Qatar reportedly expressed interest in the E-7 in the past, but it's not clear if it's in the market for this capability. India is also exploring its AEW&C options, where it operates 8 P-81s, a type also derived from the 737. Cirium's fleet analyzer shows that there are 14 737-700 derived E-7s in service globally. In addition to South Korea, the Royal Australian Air Force operates 6 and the Turkish Air Force 4. The Royal Air Force has a letter of intent for 5. Well, going back to the KC-46A, finally they're actually delivering some quantities of these because they've had a lot of problems with them, as we know, over the last couple of years. But good to see that the deliveries are now happening.
Very much so. Yeah, it's it's good news, isn't it? So let's go with Jeff then. Perhaps you could take the next one, please.
This one from flightglobal.com as well. Japan receives first E-2D Advanced Hawkeye. The Japan Air Self-Defense Force, the JASDF, has taken delivery of the first Northrop Grumman E-2D Advanced Hawkeye Airborne Early Warning and Control Aircraft, an AEW&C. Northrop Grumman's long-standing partnership with Japan is beginning a new chapter with the delivery of the first Japan E-2D, says Northrop Grumman's Jane Bishop. This aircraft provides a significant increase in early warning and surveillance capability to outpace Japan's evolving security needs. The aircraft is the first of 4 aircraft on firm order, and it first flew in November 2017. According to Northrop, it was handed over to the Japan Air, the Air Self-Defense Force on, let's see, I'm skipping around here. I'm not very good at that. In March. In September 2018, the possibility of additional orders was raised when the U.S. government cleared Tokyo to obtain 9 additional examples. Japanese E-2Ds have several modifications compared with those operated by the U.S. Navy from its aircraft carriers. Given that Tokyo's aircraft will operate from land bases, it is modified to carry extra fuel in a wet wing, providing endurance of 8 hours compared with 5 hours for the U.S. E-2Ds that operate on carriers. Those aircraft rely on air-to-air refueling to boost endurance. Cirium's fleet's analyzer shows that Tokyo operates 13 E-2Cs and 4 Boeing E-767s in the AEW&C mission. Northrop notes that Tokyo has operated the E-2C since 1983 and that it is the world's second largest operator of the type after the U.S. Navy. The E-2D delivers a 2-generation leap in radar technology, allowing the aircraft to track threats at extended range, says Northrop. The aircraft can also be used in humanitarian assistance and disaster relief capacity for civilian emergency coordination. The E-2D offers interoperability with next-generation aircraft systems and U.S. Navy allies to support regional security cooperation. I have a feeling it's a lot to do with the fact that China is really making a bid for control of the sea between Japan and China, and they're building islands even out there. And I guess there's some tensions with Japan and China regarding the China Sea out there.
Yeah,
it's a pretty old design. This it is. It goes back to the late 50s, early 60s. The Hawkeye. It's well proven, but I don't think I'd ever trust an airplane that needs 4 fins.
Well, you got that darn big giant frisbee on the top.
Yeah.
Kind of disrupts the airflow a bit, I think.
Just a tad, yeah.
I've flown with guys at Acme that flew not this particular model, but an earlier model of the E2. And they say, I believe it's the largest airplane that they land on an aircraft carrier because of its wingspan. It's quite a wide wingspan to land.
Oh, yeah, it is. I mean, the largest was the Hercules C-130, but that was only done in trials.
Right.
They decided they weren't going to do it operationally because I think there was only about a 13-foot separation between the wingtip and the superstructure. So,
yeah, that's kind of close.
Pretty damn good.
Yeah.
Okay, so one more story to go then. If we could pass that to you, please, Nick.
Oh, this is lovely because this is like what I was doing a few days ago when I was up at Duxford, meeting with the crew of Betty's Biscuit bomber, one of the C-47s that had been flown, and one of the pilots we know, Nick Kamachko, he was there and showed me around. So it was a great day. So this is a story on ABC News and D-Day Squadron, historic airplanes. Journey from the US to Normandy for the 75th anniversary. And there'll be a couple of plane tales coming out, hint, hint, all about this. So hundreds of spectators gathered in Normandy, France on Wednesday to watch about 200 paratroopers participating in the Dax over Normandy event. Interestingly, it was only the British that called it the Douglas Dakota. The American military version was the C-47. It was organized to reenact the jump made by Allied troops in the aerial assault that preceded the seaborne invasion on D-Day, June the 6th, 1944. So these guys were doing an absolutely vital job because they were the tip of the spear. They were the first guys in, and it was their job to locate and capture essential communication lines and isolate batteries that could attack the Navy and this sort of job before the invasion force actually landed. So it was absolutely vital, the job they did. One of the more stunning sights was a 97-year-old U.S. World War II D-Day veteran paratrooper called Tom Rice, 97. Isn't that amazing? Who parachuted in a tandem jump into roughly the same area that he landed 75 years ago. Well, considering he landed in the dark, he wasn't probably absolutely certain where he was when he got down. But Rice was with the very, I'm saying this, the very famous much beloved 101st Airborne Division in 1944. We can't be sure of the exact area he jumped to. There you go. It was morning, dark there, and that was hard going, Rice said. The D-Day jump, I landed standing up for the most part, and then went down to my knees and bounced a couple of times because I had so much equipment, and I had a difficult time getting out of that equipment. Yeah, when you saw them, they had stuff strapped to their legs, they had packs on their front, they had stuff dangling beneath them. It really was incredible how much gear they had to go down with. Great, beautiful drive, beautiful jump, beautiful flight. Everything was perfect, he said. One of the most significant dates in modern history. June the 6th, 1944, marks when 160,000 Allied troops stormed the heavily fortified 50-mile coastline of Normandy in France in an effort to liberate Western Europe during World War II. The beach landings were preceded by an aerial assault in which 13,000 American paratroopers from the 82nd and the 101st Airborne Divisions were dropped past enemy lines. To commemorate the 75th anniversary on Wednesday, just a couple of days ago, the skies over Normandy were filled with meticulously restored Douglas DC-3s and C-47s Dakotas, the same aircraft which carried the men across the English Channel into battle. And Betty's biscuit bomber was amongst them. This time, hundreds of paratroopers outfitted in replicas of Allied uniforms and using World War II military-style parachutes reenacted the drop. And yeah, they were those old-fashioned round-style parachutes. It really looked fantastic. Backs over Normandy was an event organized to honor the service, the sacrifice of the troops who risked life and limb to bring about the beginning of the end of the war in Europe. To make this historic tribute possible, the owners and operators of these World War II era aircraft were flying to France from the US, Canada, all over Europe, and from as far as Australia. On May the 19th, the American contingent, known as the D-Day Squadron, began its journey from Maine to Goose Bay, Canada. These are the aircraft, not aircraft like this. These are the aircraft that carries these paratroopers and flew during the war, said Eric Zipkin, a pilot and coordinator for the U.S. effort. It's extraordinary to think that 19-year-olds were doing this, and it was just what they did. It's a fitting remembrance of them. So it carries on, but I think we've seen a lot of it in the news over the last few days. It was very inspiring to see these lovely old aircraft, beautifully looked after. And many of them, have been going since the war and will carry on for a very long time. Certainly, Betty's biscuit bomber has relatively few hours, and she's had a full inspection and will have a very long life. As one of these marvellous aircraft.
Now, I hope you don't mind, but obviously you were saying you were there, obviously at Duxford very recently yourself. We've been putting a couple of the lovely photographs that you took, actually. I hope that's okay.
Oh, absolutely, yes. There she is, Betty's biscuit bomber.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us a little bit about your day then, Nick. What was occurring? How did it all come about?
Well, Nick Camacho has been in touch with the Airline Pilot Guy show and keeping us up to date with his progress and all of that will be told in the plain tales. But basically, they flew all the way across from the States through Canada, through Greenland, Iceland, northern Scotland, and then finally down to Duxford. And there they flew reenactment flights there and formation flights around. They flew over US military cemeteries in the UK. And then in the D-Day reenactment itself, they put their paratroopers all on board. All these guys had flown over. And then they flew across to Normandy. They dropped them over the beaches, went back to Duxford, came back for a second set of drops, and they were dropping over the next few days villages and towns over France where the paratroopers would have dropped for other events, because Betty's biscuit bomber was slightly too young to have actually taken part in the D-Day itself, but it took part in Market Garden, which we well know because there was a movie, A Bridge Too Far, made about it. So it dropped paratroopers during Operation Market Garden, and also in the relief of the forces that were entrapped during the Battle of the Bulge. And then it carried on and flew during the Berlin airlift. So it was there in some of the most historic events in that period of history.
It really does sound like an absolutely must not miss Plain Tales. Then I really can't wait to hear it myself. Actually, it sounds
well. I was very touched by Nick's enthusiasm, and also Sherman, the chief pilot of the aircraft. Chatted to him for a while because he's a Phantom pilot.
Ah, right. Okay.
So we had a few Phantom stories to share, so that was great.
I can imagine. Because we played last week the little chat that you and I had about the marvellous Phantom that we saw at Duxford ourselves when we were there a few weeks back.
Absolutely, yeah. So it was a pleasure to chat to him as well.
Well, marvellous. Well, thank you for that. Thank you to Armando for sending us the military stories for this week. That is where we bring the news in general now to a close. Nick, before we start wrapping up the show, there is a little piece of audio feedback you'd like us to play.
Oh, yes, please, if you wouldn't mind. I'd be very grateful.
Indeed. Okay, just give us a couple of seconds while we get that loaded. Here we go.
Hi everybody, it's Captain Nick here. Now that all the fuss is over, I'm looking back to my last days at work and the wonderful surprise lunch that was thrown for me, and I wanted to tell everyone how profoundly grateful I was for what they did for me, so please indulge me for a moment. Not only did I have a lovely day, I received the most wonderful gift of a model of my 3 favourite aircraft fins. I want to say an enormous thank you to Nige Demery, who also did a lot of the organisation, to Adam Spink, who commissioned that fabulous gift, and especially to the generosity of Captain Jeff and the APG crew, Dr. Steph, Captain Dana and Liz, and my friends David, Abby, Tanya, Tiffany, Myla, Rick Bell, Graham Haley, Phil Davis, Jen, Micah, Dispatcher Mike, who does the Flying and Life podcast, Pilot Pip and Captain Al from the Plane Safety podcast, Carlos, Matt and Nev from Plane Talking UK, and of course my lovely wife Jilly. I know that many of you wanted to join me on a final flight, which would have been a most memorable event for me, and I hope a smooth one for you, but it wasn't to be. Let me assure you, though, that the gift plus the lovely cards and good wishes that I've received have more than made up for that last time in the air. You're all wonderful people, and my heartfelt thanks goes out to every one of you.
And just behind him, you can actually see the marvellous piece of artwork that he is referring to. It's a truly stunning piece of artwork, isn't it? I mean, it's the first time I've ever seen you lost for words, Nick. I'm not going to lie.
Well, it was such a surprise and such a delightful gift to be given, and so beautifully made. Yeah, I was. And it's there in Pride of Place with the Phantom pin from the airframe Foxtrot, which was the first operational airplane I had the name on. And then there's a Hornet fin from 77 Squadron Royal Australian Air Force. And then obviously I wasn't called Scarlet Lady, so I didn't get my name onto a Virgin Atlantic A340, but there's a fin there. And they stand out in 3D. They look great and beautifully made. So it's something I will treasure forever.
We all think of you as the Scarlet Lady.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we felt very humbled, didn't we, Nev? We felt very humbled, didn't we, during our time there?
Yes, we did, and it was a fantastic day, wasn't it? And Nigel and Julia's organisation was absolutely superb. So it was very nice.
That's not what I heard.
Well, yeah, there were a couple of hiccups, which actually, as it turned out, didn't really matter because it was all right. But,
It was all papered over very cleverly.
yes.
Absolutely.
Yes, it was. Yeah.
No, it was good. It was a lovely time. So on to bigger and better things then, I presume now. I mean, I'm guessing lots of bowls for you.
I don't think you get much bigger and better than a 45-year professional flying career.
Oh, come on.
So no, I'm
Don't give up yet.
well, doing what I do with Jeff on the APG is just wonderful. It'll keep me in touch with my friends in the aviation community, and I love doing it. It's great fun. Doing my little bit of plain tales is always a labour of absolute love. I really enjoy that. And of course, I actually am looking forward to having more spare time, although I suspect it'll get swallowed up by various things because already my calendar is filling up and more and
I
more.
can say, this is the thing. You're going to look back in 6 months' time and think, how on earth did I have time for work? I think that's what's going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, I was rather hoping I might have the odd afternoon just to sit and binge out on Netflix or something,
Right.
but that's like never happened.
No, and I suspect it never will, if I'm brutally honest.
Probably
But,
not. No.
Anyway, we really should start wrapping up because Captain Jeff, I believe there's something coming up very shortly that you guys need to go and do.
Yeah, when you were saying to Nick, now there's something bigger and better coming. And
Good
I'm thinking,
point,
oh,
yeah.
wow, he's going to introduce my our live recording of
Yes,
the APG.
APG,
right
absolutely.
after this.
And there is nothing bigger and better than APG, let's be honest.
Yeah, right. No,
It's-
no, I'm kidding. Yeah, we're going to record our weekly show today. It varies during the week, and this worked out perfectly.
Yeah, very much looking forward to that. I dare say I shall be listening to that whilst I'm having a nap, unfortunately, because I've got to work in the morning. So it's yes.
Well, it's the perfect use for the show.
Oh, stop
Yes.
it! To be
A lot of people use our show for helping them sleep.
Yeah, no. As I say, our show in particular is actually officially listed by the National Health Service as the only known cure for insomnia. So it is, it's a win-win situation.
Qualified
Nev,
sleep aid.
indeed, Nev. In the unlikely event that they do want to contact the show, how do they do that?
Yes, well, you can do that by sending us an email to podcast@planetalkinguk.com. On Twitter, we are at planetalkinguk, and we've got some Instagram as well, I believe now.
so, yes, absolutely.
Yes, you can contact us there on Plane Talking UK, and on Facebook, it's facebook.com/Plane Talking UK.
So, in case somebody is somehow under a stone and has never heard of the airline pilot guy, Jeff, how do they get in touch with you?
Well, they can head over to airlinepilotguy.com. That's our website where we have all kinds of good stuff on it. And you can also find us on iTunes or wherever great podcasts are served, such as the PTUK. And
Very good, well done.
Also on YouTube, our YouTube channel is Airline Pilot Guy. So anything in the social media world or whatever, just put Airline Pilot Guy in there and you'll probably find us.
Absolutely. Well, Nev, I think we pretty much got away with that.
Yes, I think so. Hopefully next week I'll be able to take that thing off my picture behind us, as long as we've had good behaviour from British Airways.
Right, okay.
Before we go, though, I have just received my silver card from British Airways, and I do have a pair of scissors.
Right, not
So
afraid to cut it up, yes.
if there's any more funny behaviour this week, then, watch out.
I'm just wondering how that will hurt British Airways, but feel free.
Well, could I just point out, it does say on the back of it, this card remains the properties of British Airways. So that's
well, there we are. So they could.
Right, okay.
Are we allowed to mention the good news that you've had this week, by the way?
Yeah, I think we probably could. Yes, I'll be changing jobs later in the year in September, which I'm very much looking forward to. Working with some people that I haven't worked with before, but I know quite well. Sticking in the world of professional audio, which is great. So that suits me very nicely.
What are you doing on this show then?
I don't know.
Hey, now come on. And anyway, on that bombshell, it's time to.
Yes. Just quickly though, on Wednesday of this week, I'll be at the Media Production Show in London, so I should be taking my credit card there.
Okay,
see if I can give that some abuse.
Lovely.
And then on Friday, I shall be at the Aero Expo show at Wickham Air Park, which is about 15 miles down the road from me. And I'll be doing some interviews and general chat from there for play out on a later show.
Fantastic. Can't wait to see that. That is where we bring episode number 272 to a close. Thank you very much to the legends that are both captains, Nick and Jeff. Thank you so very much for joining us this week. It's been a real honour, as always, to have you on board.
My pleasure.
It was great to be here with you.
You're very kind. So we're going to let these guys go because they have their own show to go and do now. So it's time to say goodbye, everyone. Thanks very much. My personal thanks to Owen, who's been in charge of the cameras this week. Nice little round of applause for him, please. Thank you.
Hey.
And we will see you all at some point next week. I don't know when we're doing the show next week yet, so watch social media for when that's going to happen. But from all of us...
There may never be another.
There may never be another one. Absolutely. From all of us, it's time to say goodbye. Say goodbye, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Oh, he broke it. There it goes.
This is the voice of the Mr. We know you can hear us, Earthmen.
On the flight deck, they